Hello. For my class project, I've decided to focus on the West African country of Ghana as a case study to examine throughout this course. Today, I'll give a brief overview of four key development factors that have influenced Ghana's development trajectory, and then I'll discuss in brief the use of international aid in Ghana over the history of its existence as a modern, independent African nation. There's much to be said about each of the following development factors I'll talk about, so the purposes of this very short video, I'll only highlight a few things that I think are most salient about each factor and its impact on Ghana's development. I'll start with geography. Ghana is located on the coast of West Africa between Togo and Benin. It is a tropical country near the equator in the heart of the malaria belt. This location has dictated which agricultural and industrial sectors could be developed for global trade. The location of Ghana's coast in the Atlantic Ocean has also been key in shaping its history of interaction with non-African actors. As early as the 1400s, the Portuguese Navy arrived in Ghana. In the 1600s, the Dutch arrived and finally were overtaken by the British, who claimed Ghana as a colony and dubbed it the Gold Coast. The Ghanaian coast was also the key port for the export of slaves to the transatlantic slave trade. All of these interactions were possible because of Ghana's geographical location and have been critical in shaping its development. The next thing I want to touch on is the role of culture, beliefs, and values. Ghana is obviously a rich culture with traditions going back centuries. There's over 80 distinct ethnic groups in the country, with the Akan and Ewe groups being the largest. One aspect of traditional culture I want to highlight that is represented throughout the country is the structure of chieftaincy as a predominant traditional structure of governance in Ghanaian society, one that's still active today. The Chieftaincy Act of 2008 actually enshrines the rules and laws of the chieftaincy system in national legislation. I highlight this because I think it represents a good example of local culture that is needed to be taken into account for formulating development initiatives. There's numerous examples of development initiatives that failed to take into account the existence of this traditional structure, resulting in negative outcomes or failed initiatives. Examples can be found in disputes around land reforms or failures to engage the chieftaincy system in de-escalating political violence. Alternatively, development approaches that have engaged this system and accounted for its central role in representing specific communities have seen more success. The third factor I want to talk about is factor endowments, land, labor, capital, and resources, etc. And the key factor endowments I want to highlight are Ghana's rich mineral and agricultural resources. Specifically, Ghana's cocoa industry has been developed as an agricultural resource for many, many years. Likewise, its gold mining industry is well developed. And more recently, the discovery of the Jubilee oil field off the coast of Ghana has been an emerging market. Much of the production of these resources has been in growing or extracting raw inputs, with refinement and finished goods being produced out of the country. This relationship has been a key factor in Ghana's development, or in some cases underdevelopment, with much of the wealth being created from these raw materials leaving the country. This leads me to the final factor I want to briefly highlight, which is Ghana's experience with the institution of colonialism. As mentioned previously, Ghana's geographical position on the Atlantic Ocean coastline made for relatively straightforward access for shipping and naval vessels. The tropical climate made it for an inhospitable environment for colonial settlement from Europe, setting up its history as an extractive colony. Throughout the colonial period, much of Ghana's wealth was extracted to Europe, and its key role in setting up the infrastructure for the transatlantic slave trade represents another loss of human capital and obviously is an immense trauma and tragedy. So there's no question that the legacy of colonial extraction set Ghana on a development course that it is still reckoning with today. Next, I want to turn to very briefly the use of international aid in Ghana. Ghana has, since its inception as an independent nation in 1957, a long history of engaging with many forms of international aid and assistance. Between 1966 and 2020, Ghana has been assisted by the International Monetary Fund 66 times, representing $4 billion in assistance. Ghana became an independent country in 1957, and early development assistance from government donors focused on building a new nation, but initial investments dried up after perceived economic mismanagement and high inflation. From 1966 to 1982, Ghana's government was marked by a series of coups and instability. Ghana began taking conditional International Monetary Fund aid, starting a long history of structural adjustment. In the 1980s and 90s, Ghana saw a very severe series of economic crises. During this period, it adopted the IMF and World Bank programs called Structural Adjustment Programs, or SAPs. which mainly focused on privatization, deregulation, and trade liberalization. A major critique about structural adjustment programs is that they brought some macroeconomic stability but led to severe austerity that actually led to an increase in poverty amongst Ghana's population, which is obviously counter to the stated goal of poverty alleviation. In the 2000s, Ghana moved more towards poverty reduction strategies focused on sectors like education and health. This area also included significant debt relief under the HIBIC program, or the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative. More recent frameworks have emphasized working with local institutions rather than the top-down conditional approaches of the 1980s. One example of this is the Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda, and thus far have proved more successful than previous efforts. That's it for this video. I've put some sources that I use for this in the comments. Thank you very much.